Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support in the recent content. We have been continuing to do these off-season breakdowns, so we've probably done your favorite team, and if we haven't, we will definitely be getting to it. We do have a comment on our short about the Orlando Magic from J.R. Jake. FC8UI on YouTube. And he said, the Magic, if they're lucky, will be a 6th seed in the East. I agree. I think that's about where they'll be. I think they'll be in that range. But regardless, I think the hype for that squad is going to be real, considering the talent that they have and definitely the talent that they added in the offseason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, like you said, it really kind of just depends on how big of a leap that their young guys take. That's really the key, mainly Paolo. If he kind of, as we talked about in our previous episode, right, for the Magic, if Paolo takes that leap to all NBA level, an all NBA level guy, right, then that will allow the Magic to probably finish better than a 6th seed. But if he, is like basically a little better than he was last year, which I don't expect to happen, right? Then that's probably where it'll be more likely there'll be a lower seed. And even then, that may not be enough just because the East has gotten better. So it's also the other surrounding players around him as well, right? Like you need continued progression from the other young guys, which we've talked about at different points.
Yeah, so I agree wholeheartedly. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so now we move on to the next squad. The Detroit Pistons. We're in the Central Division now, and we're going to start with the Detroit Pistons because there's a lot to talk about. So last year, they stunk. They were a very stinky team, the stinkiest team in the NBA, 14-68, worst record. Set a record 28 consecutive losses last season. They went an entire month, I believe the month of November, without winning a single game. Only the 10th team in NBA history to do so, right? They lost basically from November 1st, I think, all the way to like late December. It was bad. It got to a point where if you were not even a Pistons fan, you were still watching just in the hopes that they would win because it felt like Game 7 of the finals in some of these, right? Because some of them, it would be games where it looked like they were going to pull it off, and then unfortunately they would lose. And it just was bad. It improved, I guess, during the latter part of the season, kind of. I mean, I guess it did. They did make some deadline moves, right, where they got guys like Quentin Grimes, Simone Fontecchio, right, and others, right? We talked about that when it happened around the trade deadline. But really, that was kind of a precursor to what they did this offseason, right? The first thing they did was, well, they fired Monty Williams, right? After one season, they gave him that big 6-year contract, which really kicked off, right, paying coaches more money. And then after one season in which they did horrible, they fired him. And then they replaced him with J.B. Bickerstaff, who would coach the Cavs, where, they had a better record and had more success, each year, right? Like last year, they won a first-round series the first time in quite a while, right? Last time they did that was when LeBron was there, right? Which was 2018. So, obviously, I know that the guys in Cleveland didn't necessarily love him, it seemed, but I don't think he's a bad coach, right? So, I mean, he'll probably at least build some level of seriousness within this organization, which I think is, kind of one of the first steps that they kind of have to, engage in is, right, is just kind of becoming a more serious team. And that's part of what they did, where they added some veterans, right? They added Tim Hardaway Jr. Through trade, right? That was, by sending Quentin Grimes over to Dallas. Tobias Harris, right? They signed to a 2-year, $50 million deal, right? Obviously kind of a random, bizarre signing, but a lot of people thought it was going to happen. They had money. And, but the good news here is that it's only a 2-year deal, right? So you're not paying him like a 4-year deal like we saw teams do in the past, right? It's a short-term deal. So obviously, if it pans out, just, then it's 2 years, where he's a valuable guy for your team or a possibly tradable contract, maybe next season, probably not this season. And then if it doesn't pan out, it's only 2 years. So it's not really that big of a deal. Also signed Malik Beasley for $6 million, right? So that's fine, right? Obviously, he played for the Bucks last year, played for the Lakers and the Wolves, or excuse me, Jazz the year before that, right? 3-point shooter. Sometimes he's on, sometimes he's not. But, again, either way, he does have some gravity as a shooter. Um, and then you also look around, they also, in the draft, right? They drafted Ron Holland, 5th overall, right? And that was kind of the first draft pick that kind of made the draft kind of shake up, right? Because most people kind of had an idea of who the first, 3, 4 guys were going to be, right? Like we knew in terms of number one overall, it seemed like Risa Share was going to go 1, then Sar was going to go 2nd, right? And then Shepard was going to go 3rd, right? But once you got to the 4 or 5 spot, right, then you weren't sure. I think most people felt Castle, right, was going to go to the Spurs. But Holland, that one was a little bit of a surprise. But we talked about it in the draft where we thought he could be one of those risers because he was a guy coming out of high school playing in the G League Ignite where he was kind of considered one of the top prospects in this class. Then we all know about the G League Ignite, fell apart, right? We talked about that way before it even blew up, right?
Yep.
Where it seemed like it was, not really a great thing, wasn't really working out. But it's a pick where fit wise, right? It's an interesting fit because of the fact that you're adding to a group of guys who already kind of struggle to shoot the ball, but you're kind of banking on the talent, the athleticism, and the potential long term, right? Where if he can kind of figure some of that stuff out, right, then you got like a solid identity for like some nice physical athletic guys, right, to kind of pair with the rest of this group, right? Bobby Clintman also was drafted to the Detroit Pistons as well, right? A forward. And we'll see what he does, right? His summer league honestly was pretty solid, right? So it's something where he kind of flashed like a pretty decent all around game. And he is 21, so it's not like he's a 19-year-old rookie. So it could be like a Marcus Sasser type pick where he's not quite as old as him, but it could be a guy that's coming in already with some good skill sets. So he may be kind of a productive player possibly, but we'll see because Detroit's got a lot of players that they could try to fit into this rotation. They also signed Paul Reed, right? Paul Reed was waived from Philly in order to create the cap space to bring in other guys, and they brought him in off of waivers, right? So he's got the 2 years under contract, right? $7 million and $8 million. Also traded for Wendell Moore Jr., right? Got him from Minnesota, right, in the draft day trade. But again, like looking around, most of it's around the young guys, right? Specifically, Cade Cunningham, right? They gave him that 5-year, $200+ million extension, right? Obviously, this is supposed to be their franchise guy, right? He was drafted number 1 overall, right, back in 2019, and it's just it's kind of interesting. Or excuse me, not 2019, my bad, 2021. But it's kind of interesting because when you look at his career, his numbers have gotten better each year, right? 17 and 5 and 5 as a rookie, then 26 and 6 second year, but unfortunately that season was cut short due to injury. Then last year, right, 23, 7.5, and 1 steal, right, 45 from the field, 36 from 3, right? Because he was kind of a low 40s, low 30s 3-point shooter. So and it got better over the course of the season, right? There were some positives, I think, where you could kind of see even during the losing streak, right? It wasn't because of him, right? He was giving it his all. He was trying to be a leader, but it just was not enough over the course of the season. So hopefully he can continue to grow and get better and kind of be the guy that, I think a lot of people were kind of hoping for him to be and are still, I think, kind of waiting for him to be, right? Not that he's a bad player or anything, but it feels like, that there's a little bit left on the table that you're kind of waiting for. But I think that there's room for him to continue to grow this season because, like I said, I think there were some positives in terms of his level of play this season. So a lot of unique guys on this roster. I'm very curious to see how the rotation looks, right? Because I'm going to assume right that Cade will still start, and I'm going to assume right that Jalen Duren is still going to start. But then after that, right, who else? Jaden Ivey, Ron Holland, Asor Thompson. That could be the starting 5, but the issue there is that you don't have a lot of and then with Tobias Harris, right, you signed him to the $25 million per year deal, and he's the highest paid player on the team, right? So, is he going to start? I'm not sure, right? Isaiah Stewart's still on the roster, right? Fine backup big man. We'll see if he stays on this roster long term or if he gets dealt at some point. We don't know. So it feels like the roster is in flux. Like I said, there are some solid players on this roster, but I'm not necessarily sure if all the guys long term are going to be able to fit together. Like some of these guys are just going to have to get better as outside shooters in order for this to work, because if they don't, it's gonna be kind of a rough pairing, because again, like, you love the athleticism and the versatility of a lot of these guys, right? Like a Sore Thompson, right? The fact that he kind of came out of the gates, right? Just grabbing every board left and right, right? At one point he was averaging like almost double digit rebounds a game. Then his stats kind of took a dip because they just had that weird stretch where they couldn't figure out which guys to play, right? Killian Hayes was starting for a while. But also he shot 19% from three as a rookie, which is just bad. That's
Yeah,
awful.
yeah,
Um, that's just not going to cut it. As somebody who's not like a big man, right? It's just not. So that's something to kind of look to in terms of, that's why you got all these other guys that can shoot on the roster, right? That's why like a guy like a Simone Fontecchio, right, had a really good stretch for the Pistons when he got there, just because of the fact that, hey, this is an actual human being on the roster who's capable of consistently hitting from the outside, right? Which is always nice to have on a roster, especially one that doesn't have any. So, I mean, you look at his numbers when he got to Detroit, right? He averaged 15 a game, shooting 48 from the field and 43 from three on 6 attempts, right? And he's probably not really like an actual starter on a good NBA roster, but on a team like this, you just need somebody who can hit some outside shots. So even if he doesn't start, he should still play minutes. Him and Beasley and Tobias Harris. I'm just kind of curious how many of these guys will be possible trade fodder at the deadline, given that some of their contracts are pretty reasonable, right? Like Beasley and Fontecchio, those are pretty reasonable contracts. I'm not sure about Tobias Harris just because of the money, but he doesn't have to be moved this year anyways. And then Hardaway's an expiring, right? So Dallas got rid of him for Quentin Grimes. So we'll see what happens with him, right? Either, he just stays and then becomes a free agent, or maybe somebody bites, but probably not just because it's 16 million, but who knows? So, again, I think offseason wise, right? I think there was a lot of things that they did that I liked, because I liked the draft. I liked the free agency signings, even though, again, it's going to be kind of weird to try to fit all these guys into the rotation. But either way, it just is nice to see that you're kind of trying to find some ways to sort of add and build around Cade by adding in some outside shooting. It's just I don't know how many of those guys long term will fit, because now it's like Detroit's been bad for a while, so you're kind of past the point where you're not looking for a guy like some of these other rosters are. In theory, you should already have your guy. So now we'll kind of be able to start to see if Cade Cunningham can be one of those guys. I mean, he's getting paid like one, so he kind of has to be now. But for this roster, that's kind of those are the things that I like about it. It's just the young core of guys. I don't know how they'll be able to fit together long term, but that's not really what you're looking for right now. You're looking for, the guys that were already on there. Did they get better? Did they improve in certain ways? And then the guys that are coming in as rookies, right? What do they do to impact the team right away? So, a lot to like here. I think this was a good offseason for Detroit. Again, we liked what they did last year, but it completely fell apart. But I think this one is a better one. So I think, they get a B plus from me. And, again, if you really like the Holland pick, then you could bump that up. But I think, this was a really good offseason from a team that desperately needed something to look forward to this season. And I think there's a lot of young players that have some talent on this roster, and there's guys that are better fits. So I think, there's no reason why they shouldn't, even if their record isn't significantly better, there's no reason why they shouldn't look like a better team. Like, if they don't look like a better team, something went wrong. And I think that they will look like a better team.
yeah. I give them a B. That's my grade. That's kind of where I'm sitting at. A couple of things, in regards to, what they've done. I think in terms of the guys that they brought in, I think they navigated that beautifully. I think this is the first time in a long time that we've seen them have a sense of direction, because keep in mind, I think it's been since 2009, they've undergone like at least 2 or 3 rebuilds. So, it's been like kind of hitting us in waves over time. So I think now you can finally see, the sunshine on the other end a little bit. But yeah, bring in Tobias Harris. I think that's a great move. You already talked about the 2-year contract, and that gives you so much, financial, flexibility down the line, because it's not like, you're putting yourself in a hole for, a serviceable guy. Because I think, he's not horrible.
Huh.
And it's just the playoffs. And the good thing about this team right now is your aspirations really shouldn't be playoffs. I think play in is probably like, a realistic goal for them, but I'm looking for them to kind of pile up regular season wins and just look better than they did last year, honestly. And like you talked about,
Right.
bring in Malik Beasley. That's awesome. I think I would have really preferred them to go after a guy like Buddy Hield. That would have been like a move that put them, in the A territory for me. But I think Malik Beasley is the next best option there, considering what he's able to do. And that's a vet
And what
as
he got
well.
paid,
Exactly.
what he got paid for with Golden State. They
Exactly.
probably weren't going to be able to
Yeah.
match that.
Yeah, so it's it's a good deal for Malik Beasley and then Paul Reed. These are quality role players. We've seen them in the playoffs as well, so they do have that veteran and playoff experience. And Paul Reed, we already know he's one of the better offensive rebounders in the game. So to be able to get him off of a waiver is pretty dope to me. Tim Hardaway Jr. That's probably one of the guys that I'm lower on, but it doesn't
Right.
matter because he's still going to contribute to I think regular season minutes and potentially wins as well. So I love that as well. And then the draft pick, obviously, Ron Holland. I think that goes really without saying because you already hinted at it. He's the number 2 overall prospect in the 2023 recruiting class coming into this draft. So for him to fall to number 5 is pretty cool. For them to be able to scoop him up. Like you said, it's just a matter of what does that identity look like down the line? Can these guys shoot, in terms of Osora Thompson, Jalen Duren, Ivy? Like, I feel like they've got the young core that you would kind of want. It's just they're kind of all over the place right now. And, you really want them to develop and, really figure out a jump shot. Because if they figure out, if just 2 out of the 3 guys really figure out a jump shot with Cade, that's a good thing. And then with Cade, like you said, I'm one of the people where I'm not, glazing Cade right now. I think he's more of like he's on a prove it year for me because I think we've seen a lot. There's a lot to like. I think you can like a lot about his game, but also we haven't seen him at his full potential as well because of the personnel that he's been surrounded with. But now you add in a bunch of, guys who can stretch the floor, who can shoot, decent shooters, great defenders as well. I think there's a chance that this team makes like, a play-in push if Cade not necessarily ascends, but if he continues to just really get better. Because I think his own efficiency is going to go up, especially if, defenses are trying to collapse and stuff like that. And there's actually like, shooters out there that you could take seriously because then, we already know he's got the playmaking IQ to make that read and make the right pass, 9 times out of 10. So I think his assist numbers will go up, his efficiency will go up. And that's kind of something that I think, you and I both think, you kind of have to have that in your game when you want to be in that tier of superstars. You have to be able to play make. You have to be able to use, your scoring ability to set other guys up. And I think that's what Cade is going to be able to do, considering, what they've done and who they've added to this roster. Because I think there is a level of seriousness that is in the building now. You can see it with the general manager, and, the moves that they made, the coaching, and just the way that they look, on paper. Granted, because I think we said very similar things last year, and it imploded. So, just bringing in the young guys, developing them, while also having some quality veterans around that fit the play style of your superstar, potential superstar, that's an automatic B+ or higher, like you said.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. And that's how you have to look at it is that, this is going to be not year 1, obviously, right? But it's just now it's a year where, okay, now we've gotten a core. It's just the question is now what can all these guys actually do together?
Right.
Right. And that's going to be something that I think is going to be fascinating to see over the course of the year, right? You have 2 guys, right, that are going to be in year 3, right? Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, right? And those are guys that when they were first drafted by this team, everybody really liked those picks. But now, not that, everybody hates them, right? But now I think people are asking more questions about can these guys, be there long term, right?
And they coexist too.
Yeah, exactly. Can they all coexist? And that's kind of the big question, right? So, what do you think in regards to guys like Ivy and Duren long term for this Pistons team, right? Like, do you still foresee that those guys can kind of, figure it out with Cade together, or is it more likely that one of them is gone?
I like Ivy's game a lot, but I feel like he's probably the one that's more likely on the chopping block. Because you already have an awesome guard in Cade. And I think, Ron Holland could potentially be Jaden Ivey's replacement. I think it's more so like who's going to be able to shoot, like down the line, who really is going to be able to shoot. I'm not expecting Jalen Duren to, shoot. I don't think that's really in his bag. I don't think that's in his game at the moment. But if Jaden Ivey can figure out the jumper, then he's a serviceable too. You know what I mean? And he could start. He might not. I don't know what the rotation is going to look like. That's another interesting piece because they are very deep and they did just add some more guys. So,
You're right.
that's the question. But between the two, I would probably prefer to have a duo of Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren than I would a duo of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey.
Yeah, I mean, stats wise for Ivy, right? 41 from the field, 34 from three, rookie year, 43, and then 34 last year from three,
Mm-hmm.
right? 16 a game, 15 a game, right? And then 5 assists as a rookie, 4 assists, this year. Again, I think, part of some of those numbers in terms of the efficiency could go up with the added shooters. But like you said, long term, right, the guy next to Cade probably is not a guy that would excel as much as an on-ball guard, right? It's
Right.
probably more so, a guy who can kind of play off the catch and get out in transition and also defend. And, some of those things, I mean, Ivy's a very good athlete, right? And it's not like he's, a little guard, right?
Yeah.
He's, what, 6'4"?
Yeah.
So,
He's a decent
and obviously
defender
you don't,
too. He's not horrible on
right.
defense.
Yeah, and Cade's the big guard anyway, so you don't have to have a big guard next to
Sure.
Cade because he's already 6'7",
Mm-hmm.
or whatever he is at this
Mm-hmm.
point. So
Yeah, it keeps growing, man.
yeah, so that's where like whereas like with with Duren, right, he's kind of just I guess, kind of like a prototypical modern, rim running lob threat big,
Yeah.
right? Obviously like defensively, there still needs to be, just I guess continued progress there, right? I'm not going to sit here and say he's the worst defensive big in the NBA,
Sure.
right? But it still needs to improve, right? Like because the counting stats, look good, right? From the perspective of as a rookie, 9 points, 9 rebounds. Then this year, 14 and 12, right? 62 from the field. So the offense is good, right? But shot blocking less than one a game, ideally that should go up. And it's not just about steals and blocks, obviously, because there's also positional defense. But I think it would just be nice to see the defensive numbers get better.
Agreed.
And again, they have personnel that should excel on the defensive end, but it's also a very young team. So the guys kind of have to figure out together how to defend, not just individually, but also as a unit. Right. And that's
Yeah.
one of the hardest things probably for young players to pick up on is the defensive stuff, right? Because at the NBA level, the defense is just different because you have to scheme differently for different types of players because you don't have the same types of players in college as you do in the NBA, right? In the NBA, the guys are bigger, stronger, more physical, right? There's no Joel Embiid's, generally speaking, at the college level, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to be playing, like a big physical 7-footer every night in college like you are in the NBA, right? There's no LeBrons or Durant's or Giannis's, consistently, right? Like you might
Sure.
play like one or two a week or something like
Yeah.
that. You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Sure.
Not the same as in the NBA. So, and that's the point where it's like that's the benefit of having, young talent is that hopefully they should get better every year. It's just the progress isn't always linear, and at a certain point, you will have to make tough decisions because these guys aren't going to be on rookie contracts forever. Because Cade
Right.
Cunningham's already been extended, so now this is the last year before he makes his big money, right? And you still don't necessarily know if you really have if this is the team around him at this point. And that's what we talked about with Paolo, where it's nice to kind of put together a team before you even use the cap space. Like
Yes.
we don't know if this will be the core for the rest of his tenure here, but at least they do have a group of young guys, and they did add some young and some veteran guys that make sense on this roster. So that's the
Yeah.
good piece, right? So that's kind of where I'm not going to say it's Orlando light at all, but that's kind of the part that we like about it,
Yeah.
where
It's the blueprint.
okay, now you added some veterans to this group, and so now you can kind of see how all these guys fit together, and you'll also have some flexibility, at the deadline, because like we already said, there may be some guys that might get moved, and then maybe there will be guys that will stay. But
Yeah.
Asor Thompson, right? What are we looking for from him in year two? I mean, I guess because again, like we already know what he can do as a rebounder, as a highlight machine, as even a shot blocker and defender. But obviously offensively, right? That needs work because you just can't shoot 19% from three from the field as somebody, especially somebody again who's not a big, right? Like it's one thing if you shot poorly from three, and that's not really your role at all, right? Because you don't, obviously there's a lot more stretch bigs now, but you don't have to necessarily be able to shoot threes as a center. But if you're, a guard or a forward, you kind of have to be able to space the floor at least to some degree. And there
Yeah.
are other ways you can kind of scheme around some of that, right? Where maybe you can use him as the screener or use him in dribble handoffs and things like that. But, you know, he still has to kind of develop a jump shot at some point. That's really what's going to determine his ceiling, just like his brother, where if those guys can be okay 3-point shooters, right, to the point where it's at least somewhat respectable, then that opens up everything for them. But if they stay bad 3-point shooters where nobody's ever concerned about ever guarding them from out there, then their ceilings are going to be, a lot more limited.
Yeah, it's tough because I feel like with the personnel, it really does put a
Right.
spotlight, I think, on a Sore, who is the worst 3-point shooter of all of them, I guess, in terms of the ones that take him at a decent volume. Because I feel like if Jalen Duren can shoot threes, then that solves that problem, and you kind of really don't have to have a Sore do that. But that's not the
We
case.
just,
That's
yeah.
not what we have right now. So with a Sore, I'm gonna be cliche. Obviously, it's the jump shot. That's what I want to see. But I also want to see creation. Kind of like in a similar tier as his brother, and Bilal Coulibaly. Like those three guys, I really want to see them be able to do something with the ball, in their hands. And not, kind of just be relegated to, a spot up guy or a lob threat like you were talking about. But yeah, if he can kind of figure out how to do something with the ball, maybe some mid range, I think that would be interesting. If he can develop a smooth mid range game, that would be, I guess intriguing. Um, but yeah, creation and 3-point shot for me, because I think he's already at an elite level defensively.
Right.
And he's got the intangibles too. So it
Yeah.
really only does come down to the jump shot and the work that he puts in
Right.
on that.
And the creation part is a good point because, again, even if he's not a 3-point shooter, what if he can kind of create a little bit in the mid range? Or what if he gets, like a floater,
Yeah,
where that way he can operate in the short roll, just things like that. It doesn't have to be, you know, classic ISO between the leg style,
sure.
but if he can just kind of develop some type of go-to moves offensively, right? That will also kind of open up some things for him right now,
Yeah,
right? Because we know that the jump shot will probably take some time, if it ever gets there. We know that you're not going to go from a complete non-shooter to an elite 3-point shooter in just one season.
right.
But some of these other things, right? Like in terms of the touch, right? Those are things that could probably be improved, in a shorter amount of time. And I think, like you said, if you can get those down, that will probably help as well, right? Even the free throw percentage, right? Can he get his free throw shooting up, right? Because sometimes that's kind of the concern when you look at these guys, right? Where, okay, this guy doesn't necessarily shoot threes, but he shoots 80% from the free throw line, right? Usually that's kind of a good indicator that, okay, this guy down the line might be able to shoot threes,
Hmm.
right? Like we saw with even some of the centers, right? Like Brook Lopez and Marc Gasol. Those were guys who never shot threes, when they first came into the
Yeah,
NBA, but they were always good free throw shooters. And now, well, Gasol's retired, right? But Brook Lopez, right? He's developed into a great 3-point shooter
yeah,
as a big man. So, but with Asor, right? He shot just under 60% from the free throw line. I mean, it's not like he's getting to the free throw line a ton, but that's where that needs to improve. He's still shooting almost 50% from the field, which is nice because but that's because he's, everything around the rim is pretty
yeah,
much, going in because he's, a 0.1% athlete.
yeah.
So,
He's
and that's
insane.
exactly. And that's the awesome part. And that's what makes him so enticing, which is why we liked both of the Thompson twins in the draft, right? We liked him going to Detroit, even though some people felt like it was higher than expected because of the fact that the athleticism is just so elite. And there's already some good starting points with the defense and the hustle and rebounding and the IQ, where if he can just add some of the other offensive stuff, right? That is what's really going to open up everything, right? And obviously, like it's a gamble when you have a guy who's kind of a raw, offensive player, just because of the fact that it's possible they just never get there.
Yeah, you're right.
But you like all the other intangible stuff, and I think that's what kind of separates him from maybe a guy with like a similar profile, but maybe doesn't have some of that other stuff that you would like.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, again, like that's and the thing with this roster is obviously they added veterans, but the key is going to be, the progression of those younger players because if all of them take, leaps here and there in certain areas, right? That's kind of what's going to really propel this team and then the veterans will kind of be the icing on the cake. Obviously, they brought these guys in to also perform as well, but this is what this is supposed to be kind of the culmination of building up all of this young talent. Is that now we get to see what all these guys can kind of do together, in an environment. So we'll see. But in terms of the non-draft picks, right? What was your, I guess, favorite move by Detroit this offseason, right? What do you think?
Um, that's a good question because I feel like
Hmm.
the normal answer would probably be Tobias Harris, but I'm probably gonna go with Malik Beasley.
Okay.
And I think it's because, like I said, they kind of since they missed out on Buddy Hield, they were able to get Malik Beasley, and I think that was the next best option in terms of that archetype of pretty much pure shooter.
Yeah.
So it's awesome, and he's young, only 27. It's not like he's 34, or, pushing 40 or anything like that. Durable. I think last year started 79 games for the Bucks.
Hmm.
41% from the 3-point line. So I think that's awesome. And, you know, I guess probably adding the coach too will help because I think there's going to be,
Right.
a different level of intensity. I think with Bickerstaff. So I think Malik Beasley will fit that mold. Obviously there's major questions about his defense, and those will, that his defense will never probably come to fruition. But in terms of
Right.
the shooting and what I think he can do for them, that would be awesome because
Right.
like you said, I think it's a no-brainer to really like Ron Holland and what they did over there with the draft. So yeah, I'm gonna go Malik Beasley.
Yeah, and like expectations again, like when we're talking about, oh, this guy's not a playoff guy, well, they're probably not making the playoffs. So
Yeah,
you don't
that's a
really
good
have
point.
to
Yeah,
worry about that relative to some of these other teams. You need wins, right? You just need to kind of, win more than 14 games, right? Even if they don't make the play and at least show progress internally that, hey, our young guys are getting better. This is becoming a more competent team. We actually have some type of legitimate identity, something that we can actually and actively continue to build on, as opposed to, oh, this was all a horrible mistake and we're going to have to blow this up.
right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
outside of Cade, I guess, um, who's the next guy right after him where you look at him as kind of an essential building block, right? I guess we've already kind of hinted maybe that it's a Sora Thompson, but is that different from what you're thinking, or is that more in line?
It's tough because I feel like the rest of them are kind of all in the same line, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing for some guys. I think it's a great thing for us, or but
Hmm.
it's not a good thing for maybe a Jalen Duren or a Jaden Ivey. Just considering where they are in their careers, but at the same time, these guys are so young. They're so young.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I guess between the two of Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, I guess it would probably be Jalen Duren
Hmm.
because he's a big. Um, and I know that might be kind of like a stupid statement, but I feel like the point guard and center are super valuable. In the
Yeah.
modern NBA. So if they can somehow get an elite big out of Jalen Duren, then yeah, I think he's pretty dang essential. Like I feel like if they
Yeah, I
have
agree.
if they have, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey being a duo, and Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren being a duo. I'd take the Duren duo 9 times out of 10, just because I
Yeah.
feel more comfortable about a point guard center duo than I do a backcourt duo.
Yeah, and so, really to be honest, that this is going to be kind of a big year for both of those guys because like we already mentioned, year 3, obviously it's not like if you don't pan out in year 3 you're gone, but after year 3, right? Then next offseason you're going to have possible extensions, right? And I'm sure those guys want to get paid, however much they can.
Yeah,
So, this is going to be a huge season for those two guys because if they just, you know, continue to struggle and not really look, like how you would want them to,
yeah,
then that's where you're going to start to hear more rumors about those guys. Because we already kind of started hearing it with, both of those players last season, right? Especially during that horrible stretch, right, where they just couldn't win a game, literally.
hmm
So, I'm hoping that doesn't happen again because these are all, I think really intriguing prospects. But it's just something to think about because again, you're kind of past the point of we're okay with just being terrible every year, right? Like, now you kind of actually have to, kind of just go and just kind of see what happens and, hopefully, all those young guys and vets, right, can kind of come together and kind of figure that out. So over under for this team is projected to be 24 and a half, right? So obviously
Mm.
they went, yes, exactly. So obviously, last year they went 14 and 68. So essentially 10 more wins. So what are you thinking in regards to the over under? We've talked about this several times, right? We always mention this where we're not betters. We're not, necessarily saying like, oh, go put your money on X, Y, and Z. It's more so just to kind of use it, right, as a guideline for what the expectations are for this team going into the season. So, what are you thinking in regards to the over under?
That's a solid over for me. If
Hmm.
I'm keeping it real, because I think there is no way that they win. What was it? Under 24 games with all the moves that they made, all the internal development that I think we're expecting, and then also adding a guy like Ron Holland into the mix as well. So I just don't foresee it because you look at who won 24 games last year or around that area. It would have been Charlotte. They won 21, and then Toronto 25. Like I just feel like they're better than both of those squads. So
Then in the West, I think it was Spurs and Blazers, but they're in the West, so
yeah, it's a little
it's
different.
harder. Yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean, yeah,
I'm gonna
that
go
one is a
over.
tough one. Yeah, I think that one can be an over. It's just a matter of, again, I think for it to be, a decent over, everything's probably going to have to kind of go their way. Where if there's like a couple of things that don't go right, like if the non-Cade guys just don't really work together, or, if some, obviously injuries are always a factor, so you don't even have to mention that. But
Mhm.
I think that's kind of the big factor there. If the young guys just don't really click, or, if one of the veterans just has like a terrible season, right? Like this is the year where they just have a bad year on a bad team, right? That's where it might be a problem. I feel like I'm over on that one. I don't necessarily know how many more wins is probably realistic to expect out of them, just because of the fact, like you said, the non-playoff team, non-play-in teams in the East, right, other than Brooklyn, were around 25 wins or fewer, right? Like you said, Raptors with 25, the Hornets with 21, and they're probably with these moves, they're probably going to be, they should be better than Washington. And then they should probably be better than Brooklyn. And then after that, right, probably on par with, like the Hawks and then the Raptors and Charlotte. They might be worse than those teams, maybe. I'm not sure. But, and then I guess the Bulls, right? Do we think they'll be better than Chicago?
Yeah,
Because the
I think
Bulls,
so.
even without DeRozan, they do have some other guys, but they're, I'm
Yeah,
going to assume they're probably going to be not very good.
yeah, I think Detroit's a little bit farther ahead than them. Like you
Mhm.
said, I would take Detroit over Washington, Charlotte, Toronto, Brooklyn, and Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, and it really depends because, like with Charlotte, we've talked about it where, one of our explanations for why it might be a little bit tougher for them to get to and their over is different. Theirs was like around 30 or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But, for them, the health concerns are always just a real problem with a lot of the guys on the roster. And it
hmm
just doesn't seem like it's fair to expect them to be healthy again, to be
right.
healthy this season. It could happen. And if it does, they'll get there, to 30. But, with Detroit, I think the over under should probably be the goal for them, right? Like they should try to say to themselves, can we get to 25 wins? Um, and if that's the case, yeah, I would say over as well. It's just, again, I can see a world where they don't win 24, 25 games just because of the fact that there's a world where the guys just aren't quite good enough and they
Sure.
still struggle. But I just can't imagine that they're going to be like in the mid low teens again. Like I feel like they at least got to be 4 wins better. Like at least 20. I think 20 should be very doable. Like that should be like the minimum.
Yeah.
But I think 20 much higher than like 25 getting close to 30 is probably getting closer to the ceiling of this team. But either way, the goal for them should be, can we possibly challenge for the play in? Because it's not that we know that they're going to make the play in. It's just Brooklyn is going to be terrible, and we know Chicago will be worse. And then, obviously the Wizards will still be bad.
Yes,
So
sir.
now, if you're Detroit, you should, in theory, be moving closer towards that Raptors Atlanta tier. So if you can get there, then that will get you closer to that 9-10 spot, right? So if they're going to get in there, they're going to have to beat out, probably two of those teams. And they could get there. It's just it's just they're going to need, I think, a little bit of luck to go their way with the progression of the players. But because they have that on their side with veterans, that should be a reason to kind of expect a little bit more of a boost. Whereas with Toronto, how many more wins will they get compared to last year? I mean, they already have Barnes, right? So they already, in theory, have probably like a better top part of the roster, right? So they should be better, but I have no idea what Toronto will do next season, right? Just
Yeah.
because of the fact that, again, they're kind of unpredictable sometimes. I mean, we've been lower on them anyways, but I could see Toronto being better. But outside of that, they should be in that tier. If they can
Yeah.
get to, like I said, somewhere between, some like they shouldn't finish worse than like 11. You know what I think? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, Wizards, Nets, and Bulls should be worse than them. If they're, you know, 12 to 15, then that's a problem. That means something didn't necessarily go right. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like one of those teams could possibly be better than expected just because they've had, like I said, Charlotte's had such bad luck in terms of injuries. But I think Detroit should be better, and I think they will be better.
Yeah. Agreed. I think playing push is going to be their absolute ceiling. And
Yeah.
just try
And
and
there's
pile up as many regular season wins as you possibly can, and I'm cool with it.
right. Because that's the thing is that they should be better, and because again, I thought they'd be better last year, and it's just they weren't. But to be fair, it's also a lot of change in a short amount of time, just in terms of like front office and coaching and rosters. So it may be a little bit tough to figure it out, but at least you're getting a guy that does have some coaching experience, and he's coaching a team with no expectations. So
Yeah.
it's not like it's a scenario where you have, a top 15 guy on your roster that isn't happy with how, you're doing things. This is a bunch of young guys, right? So
Yeah.
they should be, in a little bit different of a tier because, these guys, they're hoping to probably continue to learn, and, he should be able to kind of find some ways to win. And again, you don't have Killian Hayes on your roster, so there's no reason to play him either.
Exactly.
Yeah, so now it's like that's kind of what I'm kind of going to be kind of looking at is that now that you have a new front office, kind of like the Wizards, right? Some of these guys, they don't have to have the same level of attachment to those young players.
Nope.
So that's where, like I said, those other guys that are kind of in year 3, they need to have really productive seasons because if they don't, they might be gone because, we've seen it where when a new front office comes in, they don't have any, they don't have to have any attachment with those guys, and then they can just kind of move on from them and bring in some other guys. Because, we saw that, as we mentioned with Washington, right? Where like Denny Avdia, right? He's gone. And that was a guy that was drafted, and the Wizards were very high on when they drafted him, along with other players as well. So we'll see. But I think, again, probably not going to make the playoffs, but I think you should see a much more enjoyable product and also just a much better product from the Pistons overall this season, which I don't think is a hot take. Maybe expecting them to go over, maybe a hot take in some people's minds, but I think that if all of this progress is going to be worth it, they need to be kind of 10 wins better.
Yeah.
At
Agreed.
least.
Yeah. Yeah. It's their time.
Otherwise, you got to figure something out.
Yeah. Exactly.
What you have isn't working.
Yeah, it hasn't worked in the past, and that's I think where a lot of skepticism comes from with Cade Cunningham. But now that he has the talent around him, the proper talent, I think in theory, on paper, yeah, I'm expecting big things from this team. Not NBA Finals, no, not that kind of big thing, but regular season wins, please.
Yeah. And again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on the Detroit Pistons and what they did in the offseason, in regards to did you like what they did or not? Because I think most people I feel like do like what the Pistons did. It's just a matter of we don't know necessarily what it's going to look like. I think people like, I think some people look at the individual names and they're like, you added this guy, you added that guy. It's like whatever. But I think that there's reason to like, adding these players because at least, again, yeah, they're not superstars, but you weren't expecting to get any. At least you're getting guys that are, legitimately solid NBA players. Because like Tobias Harris obviously gets, has gotten clowned, right, for his stuff, for his disappearing acts in Philadelphia. But on a team like Detroit, I mean, there's no expectations. So,
and Tobias Harris was always good in the regular season. It was the playoffs where it's like kaput.
Yeah, especially in the role, right? Because obviously, this role is going to be different because there's not a Joel Embiid on this roster. But, at the same time, I mean, he's gonna get some touches, he'll get some shots, and on a team like this, where where he gets more offensive opportunities anyways, that's probably gonna be better for his counting stats. And like you said, it's not the playoffs, it's the regular season. So, it was a signing where kind of expected to happen, but still was kind of funny when it happened. But I have no issues with it for Detroit, especially because it's a 2-year deal. And that's kind of the thing that people kind of need to understand if they haven't already, where, it's really the years that kind of is a killer. Because if it was, because in the past, a lot of these type of guys would get 4-year deals. And then by the time year 3 rolls around, you're sick of it.
Yeah.
But, with year 2, you can last for 2 seasons, right? And it's like even after 1 season, there's a world where you could just end it. So,
Yeah.
but again, in
You're not
terms of
wrong.
news rumors, yeah. But last but not least, in terms of news rumors around the league, there really, isn't any because again, we're kind of at the point in the offseason where there's a lot of dead noise going on, right? Where there's just nothing really happening, just because of the fact that teams are on vacation. You got players that are still probably training and, possibly rehabbing. But we do have, some of those teams that will be going into, maybe their unofficial player camps because obviously, the next month is training camp. So we will see over the next several weeks, right, a ramp up, right, going into training camp, going into preseason. And that's obviously going to be awesome. But again, this concludes today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Let us know your thoughts in the comments about what you thought about Detroit's offseason, your expectations for the team, right? Players that you're high on or not high on. Just, let us know. And again, if you leave a comment, we'll read it in the beginning of the video, right? Again, obviously, we've already mentioned multiple times, multiple episodes. Shout out to everybody who's helped us get to, our initial goal of 100 subscribers, right? In, a very short amount of time, right? Now we're looking to get to 500. So continue to help us out by subscribing, hitting that bell, get those notifications, and we'll see you in the next episode.